Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. July 19, 1945, Patience Bay, just off the rugged eastern coast of Karafuto. Commander Eugene Fluckey pressed his eye to the periscope, his gaze fixed on the delicate wisp of smoke curling above the distant coastal mountains. Could a single plume of steam hold the key to rewriting naval warfare? From across the water, the steady clatter of a locomotive drifted faintly, its iron wheels dragging the soldiers and supplies along tracks that clung stubbornly to the shoreline. And in that electrifying moment, Fluckey made a choice that would confound every rule the Navy had ever set in stone. A submarine, built for the hidden depths, was about to declare war on a train. It should have been impossible. Submarines existed to hunt ships, to stalk convoys, to vanish beneath the waves and strike without warning. They were not meant to send men ashore, paddling silently in rubber rafts, to sabotage railroads in enemy territory. Yet here was Fluckey, already the Pacific's most decorated submarine commander, contemplating exactly that. His eyes lingered on the distant plume, and a plan that no one else had dared dream began to take shape. The USS Barb had become something extraordinary under his command. Months of modifications had transformed her into a vessel unlike any other. A submarine capable of firing rockets at shore installations, penetrating harbors considered untouchable, surviving encounters that would have ended lesser crews in watery graves. And now she would attempt a mission that defied every conventional notion of submarine warfare. The Barb was about to become a tool of sabotage. Consider the ship itself. Commissioned on July 8, 1942, the Gatto-class USS Barb stretched 311 feet, 9 inches from bow to stern, displacing 1,526 tons on the surface. 10 torpedo tubes bristled along her hull, 6 forward, 4 aft each, loaded with Mark 14 torpedoes, the deadly instruments of maritime annihilation. Her 4 diesel engines roared with 5,400 horsepower, propelling her at 20.5 knots above the waves. Underwater, electric motors drove her at 8.75 knots, silent and unseen. The Barb was built for stealth, for the deadly elegance of surprise attacks from beneath the surface, for slipping back into the ocean's embrace without a trace. She was not built for paddling crews through enemy waters in rubber rafts, planting explosives along foreign railways, yet constraints had never held Fluckey back. The seeds of this audacious moment had been sown 4 years earlier in the shipyards of Groton, Connecticut. From the Electric Boat Company's slipways, the Barb emerged as one of 77 Gatto-class submarines destined to form the backbone of America's undersea war against Japan. Her early patrols in the Atlantic and Mediterranean were, by comparison, unremarkable 5 sorties spent chasing Axis blockade runners with scant reward. Observers in the submarine force soon realized what her crews already sensed. The Barb's potential far exceeded her record. She needed the right captain, someone willing to push boundaries. In April 1944, they found him. Eugene Fluckey was born in Washington, D.C. on October 5, 1913, and graduated from the United States Naval Academy on June 6, 1935. Before taking the helm of the Barb, he had served aboard surface vessels and commanded the USS S-42. He trained at the Prospective Commanding Officer School in New London, Connecticut, and left with a reputation for audacious, aggressive thinking, that made more conventional officers uneasy. And now, as he peered through the periscope at that thin, teasing ribbon of smoke, Fluckey's mind was already racing toward the unthinkable. What would you do? Standing in his shoes, staring at a target no submarine had ever dared touch. The line between genius and madness had never seemed so narrow, and the stakes had never been higher. At just 30 years old, on April 27, 1944, Eugene Fluckey took command of his second submarine, the USS Barb, bringing with him a weapon far deadlier than any torpedo, a fearless willingness to treat naval doctrine as mere suggestions rather than iron-bound rules. His crew affectionately dubbed him Lucky Fluckey, a nickname born partly from the near-impossible escapes he orchestrated and partly from the feeling that serving under him was like winning a lottery where survival and spectacular success came hand in hand. The Barb's first patrol under Fluckey departed Midway Atoll on May 21, 1944, bound for the icy waters of the Sea of Okhotsk. Almost immediately, the crew realized they were in the presence of a commander unlike any other. On May 31st, Fluckey launched a daring attack that sank both the cargo ships Kota Maru and Madras Maru in a single engagement. 2 days later, he led the Barb into treacherous ice fields to evade depth-charge attacks, maneuvering the submarine among pack ice where no captain before him had dared venture. By June 11th, Fluckey surfaced to engage 2 Japanese trawlers with deck guns, only to submerge hours later and torpedo the fishing vessels Chihaya Maru and Titan Maru. 2 days after that, with only his last 2 torpedoes remaining, he destroyed a passenger cargo ship. When the Barb returned to Midway on July 5th, the tally was staggering. 472 tons of enemy shipping sunk in a single patrol. The crew began to understand that they were no longer merely submariners. They had become revolutionaries, rewriting the playbook of undersea warfare with every maneuver. Each subsequent patrol further solidified this transformation. By August 1944, during the Barb's 9th war patrol, Fluckey joined USS Queenfish and USS Tunney to form a wolf pack, prowling the South China Sea. On August 31st, the trio converged on a heavily escorted convoy. While the Queenfish spearheaded the assault, Fluckey guided the Barb with uncanny precision through the chaos, firing torpedoes that struck a tanker and a freighter. In a moment almost cinematic, a bird repeatedly perched on his periscope, obstructing his view. Fluckey waited patiently until it flew away, then unleashed 3 torpedoes into the Okunimaru, splitting the freighter in half. Days later, on September 15th and 16th, as he raced to rescue Allied prisoners from a torpedoed Japanese transport, the Barb encountered another enemy convoy. Fluckey made a choice that would come to define his philosophy of submarine warfare. He attacked. 6 torpedoes sank the 11,700-ton tanker Azusa. Then, at 00:03 hours on September 17th, 3 more torpedoes struck the 20,000-ton escort carrier Unyo, one of only 4 Japanese carriers sunk by American submarines during the entire war. The Unyo slipped beneath the waves at approximately 7:55 that morning. Only then did Fluckey proceed to the rescue zone, where his crew pulled 14 British and Australian prisoners from small rafts, tossed by typhoon-churned seas, diving repeatedly into the treacherous waters to save men who had survived days adrift. Yet it was the 11th War Patrol, departing Pearl Harbor on December 19, 1944, that would earn Fluckey the Medal of Honor and cement the Barb's fearsome reputation. The patrol began with Fluckey tracking a Japanese convoy along the Chinese coast. On January 1, 1945, he destroyed several small vessels with gunfire. A week later, on January 8th, he conducted a daring 2-hour night battle in the Formosa Strait, torpedoing and sinking Shinyo Maru and Sanyo Maru. Upon resurfacing, he spotted another target, the passenger ship Anyo Maru. 3 torpedoes struck with devastating force, detonating an ammunition-laden transport so violently that the explosion could be felt 4,000 yards away, raining shrapnel across the night sky like a hailstorm of metal. 2 weeks later, in the pre-dawn hours of January 22nd, 23rd, Fluckey undertook an operation historians would later describe as nearly suicidal. He had discovered more than 30 Japanese merchant ships hiding in Nam Quan Harbor along the Chinese coast, a death trap rimmed with mines, shallow shoals, jagged rock formations, and patrolling frigates. The very thought of entering those waters would have frozen the hearts of most commanders. Yet for Fluckey, the impossible was merely the next challenge. Naval doctrine had always been clear. Submarines were to avoid heavily defended anchorages. Yet Fluckey, ever the iconoclast, studied the harbor's geography with unblinking eyes and declared that they would go in. The plan was audacious: a moonless night, uncharted waters, enemy patrol boats circling like predators, and total darkness as their guide. By this point, the crew's trust in him was absolute. They had watched the impossible become routine under Fluckey's command. In the pre-dawn shadows of January 23rd, the Barb slipped into Nam Quan Harbor, navigating waters so shallow that her keel nearly scraped the bottom. Fluckey steered around patrolling warships, maneuvering the submarine to a position just 3,000 yards from the anchored merchant fleet. Every crew member had memorized the escape route, knowing that a high-speed exit through mined waters awaited them once the attack began. Then Fluckey gave the order. 10 torpedoes thundered from the Barb in rapid succession, 6 from the bow tubes, immediately followed by 4 from the stern as the submarine executed a sharp turn. 8 of the torpedoes found their targets, striking 6 different ships with cataclysmic explosions. Official post-war records credited only 1 sinking, but Coast Watcher reports suggested as many as 4 vessels were lost that night. Chaos erupted instantly. Patrol boats surged toward the submarine's position. Shore batteries opened fire, searchlights scoured the waters, and Japanese aircraft tore into the sky. Fluckey ordered emergency speed. The Barb's engines roared beyond normal limits, reaching 150% overload and propelling her forward at 23.5 knots, a world record for submarines that would stand for years. The hull vibrated under the strain, depth charges detonating perilously close, while patrol boats fired with relentless fury. A Japanese plane circled overhead as the Barb, diving at the last possible moment, disappeared beneath the waves with seconds to spare. For this audacious attack, the penetration of Nam Quan Harbor and the high-speed escape that defied all expectations of submarine capability. Eugene Fluckey was awarded the Medal of Honor. His citation lauded his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at extreme risk, above and beyond the call of duty. The Barb herself received a Presidential Unit citation, yet Fluckey was not finished redefining submarine warfare. One final patrol awaited him, a chance to prove that submarines could do what no one had imagined. Before departing Pearl Harbor in June 1945, he submitted an unusual requisition: rocket launchers for the Barb. The Navy, by now accustomed to Fluckey's unconventional requests, approved. Technicians mounted a 5-inch rocket launcher on the forward gun mount, capable of firing 12 4-foot, 10-pound explosive Mark 10 spin-stabilized rockets simultaneously at a 45-degree angle, reaching nearly 3 miles. Fluckey referred to them as ballistic missiles, though no naval doctrine yet accounted for submarine-launched rockets. The Barb departed Pearl Harbor on June 8, 1945, carrying 72 rockets and a commander determined to prove that submarines could bombard shore installations without surfacing to use deck guns. By June 21st, she reached the Sea of Okhotsk and commenced operations unprecedented in undersea warfare. On June 22nd, Fluckey positioned the Barb 1 mile offshore from the town of Shari on Hokkaido's coast. At 2:30 a.m., in the pre-dawn darkness, the town of 20,000 slept peacefully, unaware that just 5,150 yards away, a submarine was about to strike. Fluckey gave the order. 12 rockets screamed through the sky, arcing toward Shari's industrial heart. They hit factories and other structures, causing damage without major fires. Japanese civilians, initially believing they were under air attack, soon realized the unbelievable. A submarine had delivered the bombardment. By the time the truth sank in, the Barb had submerged and slipped away, making history as the first submarine to successfully launch rockets against shore installations. But Fluckey's true campaign lay further north. Over the following month, the Barb carried out a series of strikes along the Karafuto coast, embodying his philosophy of taking the war directly to the enemy. On July the 2nd, she shelled the garrison on Tulani Island with deck guns, destroying buildings and igniting fires. On July 5th, torpedoes sank the merchant Sapporo Maru outside Odamari Harbor. On July 8th, deck guns destroyed a small tug in La Perouse Strait. The submarine attacked sampans, sank trawlers, and launched rockets at the towns of Shikuka on July 3rd and Shirotoro. Each strike followed the same pattern: surface under cover of darkness or early morning, deliver overwhelming firepower, and vanish before the enemy could respond. The Japanese soon began to whisper tales of the ghost submarine, a phantom vessel that appeared without warning, struck with devastating precision, and vanished as mysteriously as it had arrived. July 19, 1945. Commander Fluckey stood at the periscope and watched an ordinary sight become an extraordinary opportunity. A freight train threaded its way along rails that hugged Karafuto's eastern shoreline, a steel ribbon linking the towns of southern Sakhalin and carrying men and materiel to hastily maintain defensive positions. What did that moving line of smoke mean to a submariner poised off the coast? For Fluckey, it was not merely a logistical detail. It was the seed of an idea so audacious no naval manual even hinted at it. He studied the ground as a tactician studies a chessboard. Where did the track press closest to the sea? Where could a submarine surface without instantly drawing attention? How predictable were the timetables? The answers aligned. Rails ran precariously near the water at several points. Trains ran on schedules. The shoreline offered approaches where a submarine could come close under cover of darkness. A hypothesis formed in his mind that would have sounded like madness to most. What if a submarine did more than hunt ships? What if it put men ashore to wreck the enemy's lines of communication? What if the USS Barb could, somehow, sink a train? Imagine being in the crew's bunks and hearing the commander propose this. Exhilaration braided with disbelief. Reactions ran the gamut from eager to incredulous. Chief of the boat, Paul G. Saunders, the most seasoned submariner aboard and a veteran of all 12 Barb war patrols since her commissioning, stepped forward without hesitation. So did electrician's mate Billy R. Hatfield, who carried a surprisingly useful memory from childhood. He had once wedged walnuts between ties to watch trains crack them, and that boyhood mischief gave him insight that would prove crucial. Every hand on deck volunteered for the mission, but Fluckey would accept none but the right ones. He set narrow rules. Only unmarried men would go. He refused to consign wives and families to grief should the operation go wrong. He preferred men with Boy Scout experience, those who had proven they could read maps, find bearings in the dark, and live off the land if the worst happened. He wanted cool heads, people who could improvise under pressure. From dozens of offers, he selected 8. Paul G. Saunders, Billy R. Hatfield, Francis Neil Seva, Lawrence W. Newland, Edward W. Klingelsmith, James E. Richard, John Markson, and Lieutenant William M. Walker. Planning opened a practical problem that threatened the whole enterprise: how to detonate an explosive beneath a train with no one left on shore to trigger it. Fluckey's first, more brutal thought was a man concealed near the tracks to trip the charge when a train approached, a plan whose odds of success were grim. Hide, wait for an unpredictable schedule, ignite at the precise instant, and then break back to the beach through hostile terrain to a submarine that might or might not still be there. The margin for error was catastrophic. Then Hatfield spoke up and changed the game. He recalled how rails sag under the immense weight of passing trains. Even the heaviest bend steel ever so slightly between ties. As a boy, he'd exploited that sag to crush walnuts. Could that simple mechanical fact be turned into a trigger? What if a micro switch were placed between 2 ties so that the downward deflection of the rail closed a circuit and fired the charge? The train would, in effect, detonate itself. No saboteur would need to linger in the wilderness. The party could plant the device, return to the Barb, and let gravity and iron do the rest. Fluckey recognized the elegance immediately, an idea both simple and lethal. Hatfield not only described the mechanism, he had the electrical know-how to build it. What had begun as fanciful talk became an engineering challenge the crew set about solving with characteristic ingenuity. With no shovels aboard, sailors cut steel plating from the engine room's lower flats and welded them into makeshift spades. Hatfield assembled a 55-pound demolition charge, combining a scuttling charge and 3 batteries, sealing the lot in a watertight container. The micro switch demanded meticulous tuning. Too sensitive, and wind or animals might close it. Too stiff, and the rail's sag would fail to actuate the circuit. He tested, adjusted, tested again until the trip threshold felt right. Every tool, every piece of gear needed for the raid was scavenged and fabricated from materials available on the submarine, the Barb's own ingenuity shop in miniature. While the electricians and metal workers improvised, Fluckey continued the reconnaissance on paper and in his head. Coastal profiles, train timetables, patrol patterns, concealment points, and an exit route through mined waters that would have to be run at full speed under fire if the attack went according to plan. Ask yourself, who else would have thought to turn a child's prank into a weapon of war? Who else would have trusted a micro switch and a volunteer party to carry out what doctrine declared impossible? That was Fluckey's war, making the improbable practical and making strategy out of observation and the smallest physical truths. The mission moved from the realm of daring hypothesis into the cold clarity of preparation, and the Barb's crew, already hardened by months of unconventional operations, readied themselves to make history once more. For 3 nights, Fluckey treated the coastline like a clock, watching the rails through his periscope and measuring time and space as if plotting an enemy's heartbeat. Trains, he noted, moved at roughly predictable intervals, usually 12 to 20 cars long, running more frequently by day and thinning out after dark. He mapped the shoreline with the same precision a surveyor uses. Several approach points allowed the submarine to come within 950 yards of shore without risking a grounding. A gentle beach sloped up from the waterline to the railroad embankment about 400 yards inland. Trees and scrub offered natural concealment for men moving from surf to tracks, and the ground itself suggested plausible escape routes should Japanese patrols appear. Fluckey chose that stretch and then waited for weather. Why weather? Because the raid depended on the sky's cooperation. Cloud cover would hide the Barb's approach and cloak the saboteurs' movements ashore. Clear skies would doom the plan. For 4 anxious days, the crew held its breath while Fluckey kept his eyes on the heavens. Every bright morning pushed the deadline closer. The 12th patrol had to end, and midway awaited by August 2nd. Each passing hour raised the chance that duty would overrule daring. Then, on July 22nd, the coast's silhouette changed. Cirrus began feathering over the mountain crests. White stratus crept down to cap the peaks a front was rolling in. Fluckey made his call. The mission would go that night. Shortly after midnight on July 23, 1945, the USS Barb surfaced 950 yards off the Karafuto shore. In the small hours, her silhouette could have been mistaken for a patrol boat or a coastal schooner common, unthreatening shapes in those waters. Quietly, the crew lowered 2 rubber rafts. Sound carries over calm seas, and they treated every splash like a betrayal. 8 men climbed down, laden with the 55-pound explosive, the improvised spades cut from engine room plates, the micro-switch mechanism, batteries, and weapons. Fluckey had skirted ceremony, no stirring speech, no cinematic send-off. Practical words were enough, and perhaps truer. Boys, if you get stuck, head for Siberia, 130 miles north. Follow the mountain ranges. Good luck. Then they slid away, paddling the 25 minutes to shore. Night is a merciless map maker. It hides details and erases bearings. The landing, when it came, proved imperfect. They had hoped for an isolated strip of sand. Instead, they found houses visible nearby. No dogs barked, not a comfort, but a fortunate silence, while human and canine tracks in the sand betrayed the presence of neighbors who might turn dangerous at any moment. They hauled the rafts high, shouldered their burdens, and moved inland. The darkness, both ally and adversary. Progress was slow and exacting. The weight of the charge and gear dragged at every man's shoulders. Navigation without landmarks tested even those with Boy Scout skills. They waded small streams, forced through tangles of vegetation, and climbed the embankment toward the rail line. Every twig snap, every leaf whisper felt amplified in the hush. Every breath seemed to announce them to the world. After about 400 yards from the beach, they reached the tracks. Now came the nerve-wracking labor. Excavate between 2 ties, fashion a cavity deep enough to conceal the explosive and its 3 batteries. Install and calibrate the micro-switch so that a passing train's sagging rail would close the circuit. The earth proved harder than expected. Each shovel, each strip of steel improvised into a spade bit slowly. Time pressed like a hand on their backs. Dawn inched nearer with the inevitability of a tide. Then the sound that arrests every beating heart, a distant whistle, A headlight bloomed on the line, growing brighter, a pinprick of steel and light racing toward them. The men had not finished burying the charge. The micro-switch was not yet set. For a breathless instant, 8 men froze on a razor's edge, abandon and escape, or hide and hope. They chose concealment, flattening themselves into the scrub mere feet from the rails. The ground shuddered as the locomotive thundered by. Passenger windows framed uniforms. Japanese soldiers sat so close that a casual glance might have revealed the saboteurs' dark shapes. The train thundered past without incident and disappeared into the night. When its sound ebbed completely, the 8 men exhaled as one and returned to the task with renewed urgency. A second chance had been handed to them by a cruel, indifferent providence, and no one present intended to squander it. With the explosive charge and batteries snugly placed in the hole, Hatfield carefully connected the micro-switch mechanism. Precision was everything. The device had to sit perfectly between 2 ties, so that the subtle sag of the rails under a train's weight would close the circuit and detonate the charge, but not a moment too soon. He made final adjustments, tested the connections one last time, and then covered the setup with dirt. To any passerby, or even a trained eye, the disturbed earth looked unremarkable, just another stretch of railroad bed along the coast. The critical work was complete. Now came the race against time. The 8 saboteurs retraced their path back to the beach under the cloak of darkness, each step measured and silent. They found the rafts as they had left them, clambered aboard, and began paddling steadily toward the Barb. At 1:32 a.m., they signaled their departure from shore. Aboard the submarine, Commander Fluckey's gaze never wavered from the shoreline. The landing party had been ashore longer than planned, and every minute increased the danger. The Barb sat exposed on the surface. It could not crash dive with men still in the water. Should Japanese patrol boats or aircraft appear, Fluckey would face the impossible choice between the safety of his crew and the lives of the 8 men returning from shore. His eyes scanned the black water, searching for the tiny shapes of the rafts. Then he saw them, 2 small silhouettes moving steadily across the calm sea. Relief swept through the submarine's crew, but the mission was far from over. They still had to wait for a train. The saboteurs paddled silently, and at 1:47 a.m., 15 minutes after leaving the beach, they got their answer. A train whistle cut through the pre-dawn darkness. Through binoculars, the crew spotted a headlight approaching from the north. A locomotive pulling a long string of cars directly toward the microswitch Hatfield had installed. The train moved at standard speed, unaware of the trap waiting beneath its wheels. Every man on the Barb held his breath. The locomotive reached the trigger point. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the explosive detonated with earth-shattering force. Commander Fluckey later described the moment in his memoir, Thunder Below. The boilers of the engine exploded, hurling wreckage 200 feet into the air. Smoke billowed in white and black clouds while cars piled into a writhing, twisted mass of metal and wood. Secondary explosions from cargo ignited, lighting the coastline like a miniature sun. Pieces of the locomotive tumbled end over end before crashing back to Earth, a chaotic spectacle of destruction. The saboteurs, still paddling toward the Barb, watched in awe as their improvised device exceeded every expectation. Fluckey grabbed the intercom. All hands below deck, not essential to maneuver come topside. He did not need to repeat himself. Hatches sprang open, and sailors poured onto the deck to witness the distant pyrotechnics. Against all precedent, the Barb had achieved the impossible. A submarine had sunk a train. As the submarine moved offshore into safer waters, the full magnitude of the achievement began to sink in. This was more than an unusual military action. It was the only ground combat operation conducted by American forces on Japanese home territory during the entire Second World War. Karafuto, the southern portion of Sakhalin Island, had been formally incorporated into Japan's Naichi, or Inner Lands, in April 1943, granting it full home island status alongside Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, and Shikoku. While American aircraft had bombed Japanese cities and submarines had torpedoed coastal shipping, no other unit had ever landed personnel on sovereign Japanese soil to conduct sabotage. The 8 men who paddled ashore had performed something unprecedented in military history. Commander Fluckey's willingness to push beyond the constraints of naval doctrine, combined with the ingenuity and courage of his crew, had created a moment that would become legendary in submarine warfare lore. The Barb continued her patrol for another week, carrying out additional operations along the Karafuto coast. On July 24th, she launched 3 rocket barrages against factories at Shiratori on Sakhalin Island, maintaining the relentless pressure that had come to define Fluckey's command. On July 25th, the USS Barb unleashed her deck guns against a cannery at Chiri, sending shells crashing into the industrial facility before launching her final rocket strike against factories at Kashiho. The following day, July 26th, she struck Shibatoro on Kunishiro Island, destroying a lumber mill and a sampan building yard. In a display of sheer audacity, the submarine rammed and sank a trawler after setting it ablaze, and in the same operation, captured 3 additional Japanese prisoners. This relentless campaign underscored that, even in the war's closing weeks, American submarines could remain offensive weapons, capable of striking at will along Japan's coastline. The Barb returned triumphantly to Midway Atoll on August 2nd, 1945, marking the conclusion of her 12th war patrol. Over the course of her final 5 patrols under Fluckey's command, she had endured roughly 400 shells, bombs, and depth charges, surviving narrow escapes that would have sunk any lesser vessel. Remarkably, she returned without a single casualty. Not a single crew member had received a Purple Heart for wounds in combat during any of these patrols. For the 12th patrol, Commander Fluckey was awarded his 4th Navy Cross, bringing his total to 1 Medal of Honor and 4 Navy Crosses, placing him among the most decorated officers in United States Navy history. The Barb herself received a Navy Unit Commendation for her final patrol, complementing the 4 Presidential Unit citations she had already earned. Her battle flag, proudly displayed upon return, told the story of an extraordinary career. Patches marked 17 confirmed ship sinkings, ribbons for Presidential Unit citations, the Medal of Honor ribbon recognizing Fluckey, and most uniquely, the silhouette of a Japanese locomotive, a singular emblem, representing the daring train sabotage mission. Photographers captured the 8 saboteurs at Pearl Harbor holding that flag, grinning with pride. The image became iconic, symbolizing not only one mission, but the entire philosophy of bold innovation that defined submarine warfare in the Pacific. The Barb's service under Fluckey set records that remain remarkable. From May 1944 to August 1945, across 5 patrols, she was officially credited with sinking 17 enemy vessels totaling 96,628 tons, according to the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee. This tally included the escort carrier Unyo, one of only 4 Japanese carriers sunk by American submarines during the war, along with cargo ships, tankers, and patrol vessels. The tonnage alone placed Fluckey among the top submarine commanders in history. Yet the Barb's significance extended beyond statistics. Fluckey demonstrated that submarines could evolve far beyond their traditional role. Under his command, submarines penetrated heavily defended harbors, escaped at unprecedented speeds, launched rockets at shore installations, conducted humanitarian rescues in combat zones, and even sent landing parties ashore to commit sabotage. Each action challenged conventional thinking about what a submarine could achieve. Naval doctrine would later incorporate these lessons, and future commanders studied Fluckey's tactics, embedding his aggressive spirit into submarine culture. The Barb's legacy endured well beyond wartime operations. After the war, she was placed in commissioned reserve on March 9, 1946, and decommissioned on February 12, 1947, at New London, Connecticut. Recommissioned on December 3, 1951, she joined the Atlantic Fleet out of Key West, Florida. Following another decommissioning on February 5, 1954, she underwent a guppy conversion modernization that streamlined her hull and added snorkels for extended underwater operations. Recommissioned on August 3, 1954, for final service, the Barb was permanently decommissioned on December 13, 1954, ending a career that had forever changed the role of submarines in naval warfare. Under the Mutual Defense Assistance Program, the USS Barb was loaned to Italy and recommissioned as Enrico Tazzoli, serving in the Italian Navy until 1972, when she was sold for scrap for roughly $100,000. Admiral Fluckey later remarked that had the crew known of the sale, they would have bought the submarine themselves, returning her to the United States to preserve her as a museum ship for future generations. Eugene Fluckey's own career continued with distinction long after leaving the Barb. He served as an aide to Navy Secretary James Forrestal and Admiral Chester Nimitz, Chief of Naval Operations. From June 1964 to June 1966, he commanded the Pacific Fleet Submarine Force, overseeing every submarine in the theater during a critical phase of the Cold War. In July 1966, he became Director of Naval Intelligence, providing strategic insight during the Vietnam War era. 2 years later, he was appointed Chief of the Military Assistance Advisory Group in Portugal, a post he held until retiring from active duty as a Rear Admiral on August 1, 1972. Fluckey's dedication to service extended into his post-military life. In 1974, he and his wife Marjorie began operating an orphanage in Portugal, continuing until her death in 1979 after 42 years of marriage. He remarried in 1980 to Margaret, and together they ran the orphanage until its closure in 1982. In 1992, Fluckey published his memoir, Thunder Below, chronicling the Barb's revolutionary role in World War II and providing a detailed account of her operations and his tactical philosophy. The book became required reading for submarine officers and naval historians alike, ensuring the story of the Barb's extraordinary service would endure. Fluckey remained active in naval affairs and submarine reunions until his death in Annapolis, Maryland, on June 28, 2007, at the age of 93. He was laid to rest at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery, joining the ranks of the nation's naval heroes. His passing marked the end of an era, the loss of one of the last great submarine commanders of World War II, a man whose tactical brilliance and aggressive innovation had forever changed undersea warfare. The 8 men who paddled ashore near Kachiho that July night in 1945 carried the knowledge of their unique place in military history for the rest of their lives. Paul G. Saunders, chief of the boat and the guiding force behind the mission's success, became one of the Navy's most decorated enlisted men, earning 2 Silver Stars, a Bronze Star, a Presidential Unit Citation, a Navy Unit Commendation, a Letter of Commendation, the Submarine Combat Pin, the Victory Medal, and numerous campaign ribbons. He remained proud throughout his life of his service aboard the Barb and his role in the historic train demolition. Billy R. Hatfield, whose childhood memory of cracking walnuts on railroad tracks had solved the mission's most daunting technical challenge, never forgot the moment his improvised microswitch triggered the explosion that destroyed the train. The other 6, Francis N. Siva, Lawrence W. Newland, Edward W. Klingelsmith, James E. Richard, John Markerson, and Lieutenant William M. Walker, returned to civilian life, carrying the knowledge that they had accomplished something no other American servicemen could claim. The historical significance of the train demolition has only grown with time. While American forces executed countless amphibious landings and ground operations across the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima to Okinawa, these occurred on territories Japan had conquered. Japan's home islands remained untouched by ground operations throughout the war, with one singular exception: the Barb's saboteurs. 8 men paddled ashore onto Karafuto, considered integral to Japan's homeland, planted explosives, and successfully destroyed enemy infrastructure before returning to their submarine. The operation shattered the long-held psychological assumption that Japan's home territory was invulnerable. Its strategic impact was primarily psychological rather than material. Destroying a single train, along with its cargo and passengers, did not cripple Japan's war effort in July 1945. Yet the mission's value lay in demonstrating that even the Japanese homeland could be reached and struck, a powerful testament to innovation, courage, and the audacity of American undersea forces. By late July 1945, American bombing campaigns had already reduced Japanese cities to rubble, devastated much of the nation's industrial capacity, and severed maritime supply lines. Japan's military braced for what they believed would be an enormous Allied invasion of the home islands, preparing to mobilize every available resource, including civilian militias, to resist the anticipated landings. In that broader strategic picture, the destruction of a single train might seem almost inconsequential, yet the symbolic impact was profound. If American submarines could send landing parties ashore to blow up trains, what else might they accomplish? If Japan's coastline was vulnerable to sabotage, how many troops would need to be diverted to guard against such threats instead of preparing for the expected invasion? The Barb's operation introduced uncertainty, forcing Japanese commanders to confront dangers they had previously considered impossible. Some historians have questioned whether such operations were necessary, given the war's imminent end. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th, combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war and invasion of Manchuria, compelled Japan to surrender on August 15, 1945. Formal surrender documents were signed on September 2nd aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Analysts continued to debate whether the atomic bombs were essential to ending the war, or whether Japan was already on the brink of capitulation due to conventional bombing, naval blockade, and diplomatic pressure. The Barb's train demolition occurred just 2 weeks before the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, and some argue that continued aggressive submarine operations in late July unnecessarily risked American lives. Others contend that until Japan formally surrendered, the United States had a duty to maintain maximum pressure by all available means. The broader history of American submarine warfare provides context for understanding the Barb's accomplishments. Submarines entered the war poorly equipped and handicapped by defective torpedoes. The Mark 14 torpedo, standard in 1941-42, suffered from multiple critical failures. Its magnetic exploder often detonated prematurely or not at all, the contact exploder frequently failed on impact, and torpedoes ran deeper than set, passing harmlessly beneath targets. These flaws were not fully corrected until late 1943, costing countless opportunities and placing American submariners at extreme risk. Despite these challenges, U.S. submarines gradually strangled Japan's economy, sinking merchant vessels that transported vital materials and goods across the Pacific. Official post-war evaluations by the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee credit American submarines with sinking 114 Japanese vessels, 113 merchant ships, and 201 naval vessels, totaling roughly 5.32 million tons. This accounted for about 55% of all Japanese merchant tonnage lost during the war. Submarines also sank 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, 11 cruisers, and numerous destroyers and submarines. These victories came at a steep cost. 52 American submarines were lost during the war, 51 in the Pacific, and 1 in the Atlantic, the highest loss rate of any branch of the U.S. military. Approximately 22% of American submariners in combat did not return. 374 officers and 3,131 enlisted men were killed, a casualty rate surpassing even that of Marine infantry. Serving aboard submarines demanded extraordinary courage. Any miscalculation or equipment failure could result in total loss, with recovery of remains nearly impossible. The cultural legacy of the Barb's train demolition has endured. Retold in books, articles, documentaries, and naval curricula, it serves as a quintessential example of tactical innovation and daring. The battle flag with the train silhouette has become an icon, symbolizing the aggressive spirit that defined the American submarine force in the Pacific. Survivors of the Barb, particularly the 8 saboteurs who conducted the only ground combat operation on Japanese home territory, have been honored repeatedly at reunions and ceremonies. The story embodies what can be achieved when commanders defy conventional limitations and crews display ingenuity, courage, and unflinching determination. Submarine warfare has evolved dramatically since 1945. Modern nuclear-powered submarines can remain submerged for months, carrying ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads or cruise missiles capable of striking targets hundreds of miles inland. Yet the audacity and innovation of Commander Fluckey and the Barb's crew remain an enduring benchmark, a reminder that even in the most dangerous circumstances, creativity and courage can achieve the seemingly impossible. Submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles represent the culmination of the evolution that began with Fluckey's improvised rocket launcher's precision weapons, capable of striking targets from beneath the sea at distances that would have seemed like science fiction to World War II submariners. Modern submarines carry electronics and guidance systems unimaginable in 1945, yet the fundamental principles demonstrated by Fluckey remain as relevant today as they were then. Aggressive action, tactical innovation, exceptional crew performance, and the courage to attempt operations beyond conventional doctrine. Every submarine that challenges assumed limits carries forward the spirit of the Barb. The fates of the 8 saboteurs and the other crew members of the Barb after the war mirrored those of millions of American servicemen returning to civilian life. They had witnessed and actively shaped events of extraordinary historical significance, yet most resumed ordinary lives, raising families, pursuing careers, and seldom recounting their wartime service except to fellow veterans who understood the stakes. How could one convey the experience of navigating a mined harbor at night, where one miscalculation could mean the death of the entire crew, or the terror and exhilaration of paddling through enemy waters to plant explosives on a railroad, fully aware that capture could mean torture or execution? Most chose silence, preserving their memories for those who had shared them. The battle flag of the USS Barb remains on display at the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut. Visitors can see the trained silhouette stitched into the flag and read about the submarine's extraordinary service. It provides a tangible link to that singular night when 8 men paddled through darkness onto enemy shores to achieve what military doctrine deemed impossible. Standing before that flag, one can imagine the submarine surfacing in hostile waters, the rubber rafts slipping silently into the sea, the saboteurs paddling toward danger, the anxious vigil aboard the Barb, and the brilliant explosion that marked the mission's success. The flag represents more than a single mission. It embodies the spirit of innovation, aggressive action, and audacity that defined American submarine warfare in the Pacific. It demonstrates the results that can be achieved when leadership encourages creative thinking rather than constraining it. The story of the Barb's raid on the Karafuto Railroad transcends military history. It teaches that many limitations exist only in assumptions, that conventional thinking can and must be challenged, that technical problems can be overcome with ingenuity, and that leadership willing to take calculated risks can achieve outcomes conservative strategies never reach. Commander Eugene Fluckey's greatest legacy was not measured solely in tonnage sunk or the Medal of Honor he earned. It lay in proving that the rule book of submarine warfare was incomplete, that submarines could accomplish far more than doctrine specified, and that the only true limit was imagination combined with courage. The 8 men who paddled ashore on July 23, 1945, could not have known that their mission would become legendary. They were simply submariners following the orders of a commander they trusted, undertaking an operation that seemed barely feasible, but was worth attempting because their commander believed it could succeed. When the train exploded at 1:47 hours, sending pieces of locomotive soaring 200 feet into the air, they experienced a moment of pure vindication, a testament to courage, ingenuity, and the audacity of the human spirit. The impossible had become reality. A submarine had sunk a train. That single moment would be etched into history, commemorated on battle flags, chronicled in books, studied in naval academies, and remembered as evidence that with sufficient skill, courage, and ingenuity, even the most improbable missions can succeed. Yet the USS Barb's greatest legacy was not found in tonnage statistics or decorations. Earned, it lived in the inspiration imparted to future generations of military personnel facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. A reminder that once a submarine sank a train. The Barb had proven that submarines were far more than vessels for attacking ships on the open sea. They could penetrate heavily defended harbors that should have been death traps. They could launch rockets at shore installations, executing missions once reserved for surface warships. They could rescue stranded prisoners amidst typhoon-tossed seas. And uniquely, they could send men ashore to sabotage enemy infrastructure in the heart of enemy territory. Each of these feats expanded the very definition of what submarines could accomplish. Commander Fluckey's philosophy shaped every aspect of the Barb's operations. He believed that submarines should seize the offensive whenever possible, that risks could be assessed and managed rather than avoided, that crew ingenuity should be nurtured rather than stifled by rigid procedures, and that often the most effective defense was an aggressive offense that kept the enemy off balance. The results were undeniable. Under Fluckey, the Barb sank more tonnage than most submarines would in their entire service careers. She undertook operations that others deemed impossible and survived situations that should have resulted in her loss all, without a single casualty from enemy action. The relationship between Fluckey and his crew exemplified the finest traditions of naval leadership. He demanded excellence but provided both the authority and the tools his men needed to achieve it. He assumed responsibility for failures and shared credit for successes. He treated his crew with genuine concern, reportedly even storing cases of beer in the enlisted showers to reward them after successful engagements despite regulations. His men responded with absolute loyalty, willing to undertake missions that might have seemed suicidal under any other command. They trusted Fluckey because he had proven time and again that his unconventional tactics worked, that his calculations of risk were sound, and that he would bring them home safely. The technical innovations that made the trained sabotage possible reflected the same creative problem-solving that had defined the Barb's operations throughout the war. Lacking proper digging tools, the crew fabricated them from steel plates. When it came to detonating the charge without leaving a man ashore, Billy Hatfield drew on childhood experiences and turned them into a reliable micro-switch trigger. The team rigorously tested and calibrated the device, adjusting it until it functioned perfectly under real-world conditions. These solutions were not the product of following a manual. They were the work of intelligent men given freedom to innovate and the confidence that their ideas would be respected. The mission also underscored the value of patience and timing in military operations. Fluckey spent 3 nights observing the railroad before committing to action and waited 4 days for the cloud cover that would conceal the submarine and landing party. He selected the landing team based on precise criteria to maximize success and minimize risk. He meticulously planned every detail while retaining the flexibility to adapt to unforeseen challenges. This combination of preparation and tactical adaptability defined Fluckey's approach to submarine warfare. The psychological impact of the mission extended far beyond the immediate tactical result. Japanese commanders who learned of the train demolition faced troubling questions. If American submarines could deploy saboteurs to destroy critical infrastructure and return safely, what other vulnerabilities lay along Japan's extensive coastline? How many troops would need to be diverted from defending against the expected invasion to patrol thousands of miles of shore? Could raiders strike whenever and wherever they chose? These uncertainties had strategic value far exceeding the destruction of a single train. The operation also marked the culmination of the Barb's evolution under Fluckey's command. From a submarine with an unremarkable record in her first 7 patrols, she had become the Pacific Fleet's most innovative and aggressive submarine, embodying audacity, ingenuity, and the transformative power of inspired leadership. This transformation aboard the Barb did not stem from new equipment or a different crew, but from leadership that inspired rather than constrained excellence. Fluckey's readiness to attempt missions other commanders dismissed as impossible fostered a culture in which innovation was expected and extraordinary accomplishments became routine. The contrast between the Barb's early, unremarkable patrols and her performance under Fluckey's command underscores a crucial truth. Leadership can be the decisive factor in military effectiveness. The submarine herself had changed little. Her hull, engines, torpedoes, and deck guns were the same. Crew skills were comparable to those aboard any other Gato-class submarine. What transformed her was a commander's vision, a willingness to test the limits of what was considered possible. This suggests that many military units operate below their potential, not due to deficiencies in personnel or hardware, but because imagination and calculated risk-taking are constrained by convention. The story of the USS Barb and her audacious train raid also serves as a lesson in the origins of military innovation. Doctrine manuals never suggested submarines could attack trains. Staff college curricula made no mention of submarine-launched ground operations. The idea emerged from a commander observing a tactical opportunity and asking a simple question: why not? Rather than accepting traditional limits, Fluckey envisioned a new approach, one that would redefine what a submarine could accomplish. This pattern innovation, driven by operational commanders willing to challenge doctrine, has repeatedly shaped military evolution throughout history. The success of the train mission vindicated Fluckey's philosophy of submarine warfare. Critics had questioned his aggressive tactics, labeling them reckless or attributing success to luck. The raid proved otherwise. Every element of the operation, from improvised equipment fabrication to precise timing, from meticulous observation of terrain and weather to carefully planned escape routes, was executed with calculated skill. Its apparent impossibility lay not in reality, but in conventional thinking. The broader significance of the Barb's service under Eugene Fluckey transcends World War II. The submarine demonstrated principles that remain relevant across all military domains: leadership that fosters innovation, crews empowered to think creatively rather than follow rote procedures, a willingness to attempt missions outside established doctrine when a tactical advantage demands it, rigorous preparation balanced with flexibility, and an organizational culture that expects excellence rather than treating extraordinary achievement as anomalous. These principles are universal. They apply to nuclear submarines armed with ballistic missiles, surface fleets, aircraft operations, ground combat, and elite special operations units. The Barb's legacy lives wherever military personnel challenge conventional limits to achieve objectives once deemed impossible. Every successful special operation, every inventive tactical solution, every commander questioning whether doctrine addresses the present situation carries the spirit Eugene Fluckey infused into submarine warfare in 1944 and 1945. Decades later, the story of the submarine that sank a train continues to captivate because it illustrates enduring truths about human capability. When people unite toward a common purpose, when leadership encourages rather than restricts creativity, when technical problems are treated as challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles, remarkable feats are possible. The 8 men who paddled ashore onto enemy territory and successfully destroyed a train proved that courage, ingenuity, and determination can transform the impossible into reality. The USS Barb returned from her 12th War Patrol having redefined the scope of submarine warfare, establishing precedents that would influence naval operations for decades. She demonstrated that submarines could successfully employ rockets against shore installations, a capability that would evolve into modern submarine-launched cruise missiles. She proved that submarines could penetrate heavily defended anchorages areas previously considered death traps, validating aggressive tactics that would be studied and emulated by generations of submarine commanders. She showed that submarines could conduct humanitarian rescue operations in combat zones, establishing precedents for undersea involvement in life-saving missions. Most dramatically, she proved that submarines could send landing parties ashore to conduct sabotage operations, expanding the definition of submarine warfare far beyond the traditional task of attacking ships at sea. Each of these innovations challenged existing doctrine and required Fluckey to convince skeptical superior officers that unconventional operations were worth attempting. His success in securing approval for audacious missions reflected the credibility he had earned through consistent performance. His ability to articulate clear tactical rationales for unconventional approaches, his demonstrated skill in calculating and managing risk, and his proven record of bringing his crew home safely from operations that other commanders would have deemed suicidal. This credibility gave him the latitude to attempt missions that might have been denied to less experienced commanders. The relationship between innovation and credibility in military organizations is crucial. New approaches and unconventional tactics face inherent skepticism in institutions built on tradition and established procedures. Innovators must first establish credibility through consistent performance before they gain the authority to attempt truly revolutionary operations. Fluckey's progression from competent submarine commander to revolutionary tactical innovator followed this pattern. Early successes with conventional operations established his credibility. That credibility then allowed him to attempt more aggressive tactics, which generated additional success, further enhancing his authority. This positive feedback loop culminated in operations like the train demolition missions that would have been rejected if proposed by commanders with less proven records. Assessing the USS Barb service under Eugene Fluckey requires contextual understanding of the broader Pacific submarine campaign. The Barb was one of approximately 250 submarines that served in the Pacific during World War II. While her record was extraordinary, many other submarines achieved impressive results through aggressive action and tactical skill. What set the Barb apart was the consistency of excellence across multiple patrols, the diversity of tactical innovations successfully employed, and the symbolic resonance of missions like the train demolition, which captured public imagination. Yet the Barb's achievements also reflected advantages that many earlier submarines lacked. She operated late enough in the war to benefit from corrected torpedoes, improved radar and electronics, refined tactics developed over 3 years of combat experience, and a Japanese anti-submarine force weakened by attrition. Earlier, submarines had fought with defective torpedoes against a more capable enemy. The Barb's record, while exceptional, was built on the foundations laid by these predecessors, and recognizing that context does not diminish her accomplishments, it places them in proper perspective. The submarine's success was the result of a unique convergence. Eugene Fluckey's tactical brilliance, exceptional crew performance, technological improvements, refined doctrine, and favorable strategic circumstances. Remove any of these elements, and the results would have been different. The Barb story is not solely about one brilliant commander or one exceptional crew. It is about the entire system of submarine warfare as it evolved to decisive effectiveness by 1945. The enduring fascination with the USS Barb and her impossible raid on a Japanese train transcends military history. People are drawn to stories of underdogs achieving unlikely victories, of creative problem-solving overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, of courage and determination prevailing against long odds, and of teams accomplishing missions that no individual could achieve alone. The Barb's legacy embodies all these elements, capturing the imagination and inspiring future generations with a story of ingenuity, audacity, and the extraordinary capabilities of human cooperation under pressure. The USS Barb's story embodies all these elements within the dramatic context of submarine warfare during history's largest and most destructive conflict. The image of 8 men paddling through darkness toward enemy shores, carrying improvised explosives to attack a target no submarine had ever considered engaging, captures the imagination in ways that statistics about tonnage sunk cannot. The human element, the fear they must have felt, the ingenuity required to solve technical challenges, the split-second decision to hide rather than abort when the first train passed, and the relief when the explosion confirmed their success, makes the story compelling and memorable. These men were not superhuman warriors, but ordinary sailors placed in extraordinary circumstances, rising to meet challenges through courage, skill, and teamwork. The Barb's legacy endures in submarine force culture, which values aggressive action, tactical innovation, calculated risk-taking, and crew excellence. Every submarine commanding officer who faces a tactical decision must weigh conservative safety against aggressive action that carries risk but offers greater potential reward. The Barb story reminds them that the greatest achievements in submarine warfare have come from commanders willing to attempt operations that initially appeared impossible. This cultural legacy may be the submarine's most significant contribution, inspiring generations of commanders to question whether doctrine adequately addresses current circumstances and to consider whether unconventional approaches might achieve superior results. The story of the USS Barb's impossible raid that blew up a train in Japan underscores a broader truth. Military excellence emerges from the combination of visionary leadership, skilled personnel, technological capability, refined doctrine, and favorable circumstances. The Barb possessed all of these elements during her final 5 war patrols under Eugene Fluckey's command. The result was a record of achievement that ranks among the greatest in submarine warfare history, and a legacy that continues to inspire military personnel 3/4 of a century later. The submarine that sank a train proved that with courage, ingenuity, and determination, even the most impossible missions can succeed.